Should America adopt former President Donald Trump's idea of giving the death penalty to drug war violators? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle. The show that you all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined, as I am most weeks, by my co-host of the Libertarian Angle, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you and have our viewers and listeners with us.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. Please keep in mind that this is our end-of-year fundraising time. We would greatly appreciate your generous support. If you've supported us in the past, we hope that you'll renew your support. Most of the money we raise here at the end of the year is used to help fund our activities during the coming year. Of course, we still receive nice donations during the year, but this is the big push to help us get through the next year, and we can't do it without those of you that help us out in a bigger way, and we're grateful for y'all keeping us going for 33 years, and that's how we've been able to advance liberty here at FFF. And if you've never donated before, this would be a great time to start. It would be an honor to have you join us. Keep in mind that for a $250 donation, you join our FFF Freedom Club, which gets you a personal email to the FFF Freedom Club from me on a monthly basis. So, Richard, as you know, Donald Trump has announced his candidacy for president. And in that announcement, he made a fascinating point that I think really deserves addressing, especially from us in terms of libertarianism. He brought up the drug war. Now, this, as you know, is a federal program that is bipartisan. It has been run by both Democrats and Republicans for decades. It's a total fiasco. It has brought nothing but death and violence and cartels and gang wars and corruption, not to mention the ruination of countless lives of people who have been sent for long prison terms. And yet, here is Trump, instead of acknowledging this disaster, he takes the standard status Republican Democratic approach. He says if he's reelected to be the president of the United States, he is going to double down on the drug war. And he's going to, in fact, give the death penalty to anybody, I think, caught violating drug laws, but maybe he limited it to people who are caught distributing drugs. I'm not sure, but either way is horrific. And of all things, he points to the communist regime in China as his model. I mean, it doesn't really surprise me. I mean, Republicans have long been known for their authoritarian tendencies and their totalitarian tendencies. But my gosh, to be open and blunt and use the Chinese communists as one's model, that's incredible. I mean, he pointed to the fact that in China, they don't have a drug problem, which is ridiculous because they do. But he said the reason they don't have a drug problem is because their justice, and I put justice in quotation marks, is swift. That they're caught one day and they're tried the next day and they're given the death penalty the next day. I mean, that is totally contrary to America's original founding system of justice. The whole idea behind the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendment was to stop this kind of Chinese communist totalitarian type of justice. I mean, those amendments are like barbed wire entanglements that prevents that type of swift, quote, justice. The framers did not want that kind of thing. The American people did not want that type of thing. They wanted a system by which we could be certain that the truly guilty got punished, but not the innocent. And that's why the purpose of those barbed wire entanglements. But more fundamentally, even if you follow all these procedures, there are certain laws that and programs that should never be enacted in the first place. There's no reason why people should be punished by the state for ingesting what they choose to ingest, what they choose to distribute, no matter how dangerous it is. I don't care if it's fentanyl or marijuana or cigarettes or alcohol or cocaine or heroin. Adults have a right to ingest whatever they want to ingest. This is what Republicans and Democrats simply do not understand. They think that it is the duty of the state to serve as people's daddy, to take care of them, to watch over them, and to send them to their room if they put something wrong into their mouth. And the room in this case happens to be a cell in a federal or state penitentiary. So what Trump has done really is just reflect the standard mindset of the Republicans, the conservatives, the Democrats, the liberals. They all have supported this drug war for decades. It's now has there been movement in the right direction? Absolutely. I mean, some states, as you know, have legalized marijuana. And the feds have backed off in those states by refusing or deciding not to endorse or enforce the federal marijuana laws in those states. But by and large, we've still got this drug war going. There's still people serving long prison sentences. And let me finish this little spiel by pointing out what's happening with Brittany Griner. She's the famous U.S. basketball star. She's serving a 9-year prison sentence in Russia for having a minute amount of marijuana. And of course, the U.S. mainstream press and the U.S. officials are exclaiming against them. But the fact is that there's a lot of people here in the United States, especially at the state level, that are serving enormously long sentences for marijuana possession. But so there's hypocrisy there because you don't see them exclaiming about, hey, let's release them too. But the fact is, no one ever should be serving any kind of jail sentence or even being punished by the state for ingesting what he wants to ingest. In fact, my belief is that if there's anything that distinguishes a libertarian from a conservative or a liberal, it's this drug war, because this program really demonstrates the fundamental principle of liberty that is violated by both conservatives and liberals or progressives, and where libertarians have always stood fast. What do you think?
Well, I think we need to also keep in mind that, in one sense, as you were alluding to, what Trump is calling for in terms of a crackdown on drug dealers and drug use is nothing new. Now, while technically it was Richard Nixon, a Republican president, who formally announced a war on drugs back in the 1970s, the federal government has been attempting to impose its power on the free and voluntary and peaceful choices of people, victimless crimes as it sometimes is referred to, for well over a century. Such things as cocaine and heroin were legal drugs, acquirable at a pharmacy before the Pure Food and Drug Administration came into effect around 1914. Were there state laws? Maybe so, but the federal government wasn't involved. But since really 1914 and the imposition of these restrictions, these federal restrictions on the personal and peaceful use of various narcotics, the U.S. government has been fighting this war now for over a century, with the end result that it is not won the war. It has corrupted the legal and the political system, because it generates a black market in which those who offer that which people want, even if we don't approve of those people's choices and some of their consequences for those people, giving people what they want. The black market is merely the free market driven underground, and the violence, the corruption, the turf battles, the losses of untold lives as a result of this lies at the doorstep of no place other than the politicians and the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., in my humble opinion. If there are people who die from overdoses or various other complications, it's due to the fact that you can't get a prescription from a doctor or have it purchasable over the counter with directions as to what is a safe dosage, or the dirty needles, because these needles are not freely available for a person. There are restrictions on them. So people share dirty needles. They don't properly sanitize a needle themselves between uses, et cetera, et cetera. Most drug deaths are not overdoses in the technical sense, but the fact that you're buying them off the street and the drugs are cut with various additional ingredients that often are the poisonous elements that exacerbates the health or even death problems. Um, so Donald Trump is merely reflecting and representing uh, a consistent and persistent, and if I dare I use the phrase, bipartisan attempt for the federal government to impose its power and basically tell people, thou shalt not, even if it's yourself, even if it's a peaceful voluntary transaction, even if it imposes no harms upon others, it is the state attempting to determine how you shall live in terms of ingesting various substances which you may choose to, but they, the ideological and political elite, have decided is not good for you, and we're going to prevent it. But as is always the case, there are unintended consequences. And perversely and pervasively, all of these have been negative for over a century. Now, what has Donald Trump added to this? That at the federal level, if he were to be elected president again, he would be pushing for the death sentence, swift justice. And as you're saying, this is the authoritarian, the totalitarian method. I mean, it's the Stalinist method. The people are rounded up as enemies of the people. Drug use is a version of enemies of the people in these people's minds. And you put before a kangaroo court, and a confession is beat out of you, and then you're put into the basement of the secret police and just shot. And what Trump is calling for is by implication a variation on that thing, a violation of the constitutional protections, as you were talking about, but most importantly, exacerbating a terrible situation, because it will not stop it. It will just drive it further underground. It'll be more corrupt. It'll be more violent, and it'll be more embedded if you impose those penalties. And who will be the people who will risk it, even in the face of a federal death sentence? Those who are the most hardcore criminals, who don't give a damn, and who will be willing even to risk their own life to be able to take advantage of a black market and the revenues that can be earned from it.
Yeah, you raise a lot of good points. I found it interesting that you raised Richard Nixon, because he was the first one to really declare a war on drugs. I mean, we'd had drug laws before that, but he comes up with this drug war. And I think it was John Ehrlichman, his aide, his counselor, that later disclosed that this was really a way to go after blacks, that they didn't, and also anti-war protesters. They figured this was a way to suppress them, because they couldn't put them in jail for what they were saying, but they could put them in jail for violating drug laws. And that was really the part of the, now really I can't say it was the beginning of the racist part of this thing, because they went after Billie Holiday even earlier than that with drug laws, as she was a drug addict, and they used it as a way really to drive her to her death. And but certainly after Nixon, it was clear that the war on drugs became very racial motivated. And I consider the drug war the most racist government program since segregation, maybe even more so, because people know that the adverse consequences have fallen disproportionately on blacks. And it's a nice little cover, especially for racist judges and racist prosecutors, to say, "Oh no, we're not doing anything racist here. We're just enforcing the drug laws." And same thing with bigoted cops that see blacks walking down the road and start harassing them and patting them down and humiliating them, and they can say, "Oh no, we're just enforcing the drug war. That's all." Well, of course, they're doing much more than that. Um, your point about the violence that is produced is absolutely right on. That if you look, in fact, if you go to the Philippines under this guy Duterte, uh, I think his name was Rodrigo Duterte. I'm not sure of his first name. But he was there, the elected president of the Philippines. He did exactly what Trump says he's going to do. He instituted this program of shoot on sight. Anybody caught distributing drugs or violating the drug war, and cops were killing people in mass in the Philippines. The International Criminal Court is still trying to bring charges against Duterte and his minions there for the horrors that they inflicted on drug dealers and drug addicts and so forth. And what was the end of this whole thing? They still have a drug problem. If they had won the war on drugs, Duterte could have left office saying, "Well, we're repealing drug laws now. There's no more drug problem." But it didn't do any good at all. The drug problem continues to exist. And another example of this is in Mexico. They cracked down in Mexico, I don't know, some 10 years ago or so. They brought the military in, which you can bet your bottom dollar that's what Trump's going to be doing if he's elected again to the presidency. He's going to bring the military to bear, along with, of course, enforcing his immigration controls on the border. And in Mexico, when they brought the military in, the result was, get this, tens of thousands of people dead from the violence associated with having the military fight the drug cartels. We're talking about 60, 70,000 people killed in the crossfire, not by drugs, but by the drug war, by this crackdown. 60 to 70,000 people. It's incredible. And that's exactly what would happen here. Now, we got a lot of deaths, but we don't see the carnage that's in Mexico because we don't yet have the military involved. And finally, your point about these corrupted drugs is absolutely right on. That most people, when they say, "Oh, he died of a drug overdose of fentanyl or whatever," as you point out, it's not really an overdose; it's corrupted drugs.
The impurities, the impurities.
Impurities, and and when you're selling these corrupted drugs on the black market, you're not worrying about somebody suing you for negligence or gross negligence in the product or defective product that you've sold somebody, because lawsuits are not brought against drug lords and drug dealers and so forth for obvious reasons. But in a free market, all of a sudden now all those guys go out of business. I mean, this is the real irony of this thing, is that here Trump and his cohorts want to enforce the drug war even more to get rid of all these drug cartels and drug kingpins, when actually they're reinforcing them. And we've seen that in Latin America, that as soon as they destroy the Medellin cartel, it's replaced by another cartel or 10 more cartels. The only real way to get rid of these cartels is through drug legalization, because they can't afford to compete in a legal market. They're put out of business immediately. The only way they can exist and compete is in a black market. And that's where they shine, because in a black market, you have to be able to kill people and kill competitors and so forth. Well, in a legal market, they can't compete, like against pharmacies. And if pharmacies are producing drugs, well, as you point out, now people, addicts, can get good needles, clean needles. They can get sound drugs instead of corrupted drugs, because a pharmacy knows it can get sued if it sells a defective product and it causes a death. Equally important, it can be run out of business. It can lose market share if people get the sense that they're not selling solid products. Now, none of this is to say that drug consumption is a good thing or being a drug addict is a good thing. It's saying that we've got to approach this problem in a rehabilitative way, in a compassionate way. That, sure, we can all sympathize with drug addicts, but we don't put them in jail for being addicted to drugs. We want them to seek therapy, to seek help. And in a legal environment, they're encouraged to do that. And they're able to, in the meantime, get solid drugs, that is good drugs, at a pharmacy or a reputable place, as compared to today, where they're not encouraged to go into rehab, because as soon as they go to Narcs Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous and report that they have a drug addiction, there's a narc right there ready to turn them in and go and arrest them. So, in other words, the illegality drives the urge for rehabilitation underground. People are scared to seek rehab because of the possibility of getting caught during the rehab program. In a legal market, people are encouraged to come out, confront their addiction, be open about it, seek help for it, get compassion from others, and in the process, be able to get sound products at pharmacies and other suppliers.
You know, the analogy that many have brought out, and it's worth highlighting because it's true, is that we've seen this and its disastrous effects before, and we learned a lesson from it. And that's the Prohibition era. Before 1920, there were a number of states that attempted to ban the use of alcohol. It just generated black markets in those states, like Wyoming, for instance. It's where the term bootlegger came from. There would be smuggled bottles of whiskey in cowboys' boots. That was a bootlegger. Uh, and then finally in 1920, through the constitutional procedure of an amendment, it was made a federal crime for the production, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages of any type, whether a beer to hard to a liqueur to wine, whatever. And that went on for 13 years until another constitutional amendment went through the constitutionally legal process to repeal that earlier amendment. Now, what was it? What did we see during those 13 years from 1920 to 1933? Before that, there was no crime in the drug business, but certainly, excuse me, in the alcohol business. You went to the liquor store, you went to the local saloon or bar. You consumed it out in the public in those places. You could drink at home, but now it's illegal. And what did it generate? The mafia, that imagery of Al Capone in the South Side of Chicago, the wars between those who are dealing and the selling of alcoholic beverages, the huge criminal activities of smuggling alcohol in, or from Canada or Mexico, or by boat from places like Cuba or Bermuda. I mean, this was notorious. Supposedly, John Kennedy's father made some of his money by smuggling illegal alcohol from Canada. The fact was that this destroyed the country. You had street crime, you had violence, you had the uncertainty of what kind of alcohol you had purchased or the back of a truck, and it was a disaster. Now, what happened when these laws were lifted? All of these criminal aspects of the production, distribution, sale, and purchase and use of alcohol disappeared. The organized crime related to alcohol just disappeared overnight virtually, because that was all legal, above board once again. And if these drug laws could be repealed in a similar dramatic way, the crime, the violence, the corruption, the unsafety of the product would all evaporate literally within a matter of weeks, if maybe months, but certainly weeks and months. All of that would be gone.
Yeah, I think that the parallel is perfect between alcohol prohibition and drug prohibition. In fact, I find it kind of interesting, Richard, that they understood that you needed to enact a constitutional amendment that would permit the federal government to make the consumption and distribution of alcohol illegal. Now, why did it require a constitutional amendment? Why didn't Congress just enact a law that said this is all illegal, like they've done with drug laws? Well, because it was understood that the Constitution did not grant the federal government authority to enact that kind of law. That everybody understood that this was a deprivation of liberty. So they said, well, what do we do? Well, in order to get around that problem, we need a constitutional amendment, permitting the federal government to really destroy this aspect of liberty, the right to consume alcoholic beverages. And then, as you point out, in order to get rid of it, because they realized what a disaster it was, they needed a new constitutional amendment that repealed that amendment. Well, why doesn't the same principle apply to drugs? If the Constitution doesn't provide the power to the federal government to enact laws with respect to alcohol consumption and distribution, where does it grant the same authority to do so with drug consumption and drug distribution? It really goes to show you how, as time has gone on, they really have ignored the problem of constitutional authority to do anything. Their position is we can do whatever we want, and we don't give a damn about what the Constitution says. The your point about Al Capone is good too. I mean, this guy was clearly at the head of much of the violence that was associated with prohibition, just like these cartels are associated with the prohibition of drugs. I think it's worth mentioning also that they couldn't get Capone. They just couldn't catch him. The guy was too smart. So how they end up getting him, just a little digression, but I think it's worth mentioning from a libertarian standpoint. They used the income tax laws. The federal income tax had come into existence in 1913. Americans had lived without an income tax for more than a century, and it was designed to just take money from the rich. That was what the promise was. We're only going to take money from the rich. Well, as we've seen with Capone, they used the income tax violation that Capone had engaged in. He hadn't reported his income, and that was the way they got him. It was one of the early instances of where they proved that income tax laws are there to provide more than just extract revenue from people.
And by the way, in addition to that, just as we've seen the tracking down, the capture, and the arrest and imprisonment of cartel leaders has not ended the drug problem or the existence of the cartels. The illegal purchase, production, use of alcohol did not come to an end when Al Capone was sent to Alcatraz.
Oh, of course, no.
It just went on. His underlings like Frank Nitti and these others, they just kept the organizations going, and new ones arose.
Yeah, just like the drug cartels. I mean, there's a great series on Netflix. What's it called? Narco. And it's the rise of the drug cartels in Latin America, and Narcos. And as they knocked out one, 10 more would take their place. Just standard. And there's another point that needs to emphasizing, Richard, and that's the corrupting aspect of this. You know, we're all taught to believe that it's only in Mexico where government officials are corrupted and participating in the drug cartels. This is just pure nonsense. That corruption is deeply embedded over here. I just read an article where some DEA agent just got arrested or convicted, I can't remember which one, for participating in the drug war and making big money from it. And now he's naming names of other agents that he says were involved in this thing. But it's just standard. I mean, everybody knows, and this is the point he made, and everybody knows this, that nothing they do is going to end this drug business. I mean, they've been waging this thing for decades, and everybody that wants drugs can get them. Nothing they're going to do. So if a DEA agent's sitting there saying, well, what's the point of this? Why am I risking my life for this? I might as well make some money. There's a rationality to that decision. But so there's people on the take. There's no doubt in my mind that there's federal judges, state judges on the take. There's prosecutors on the take, law enforcement people on the take. I mean, I've heard that down there on the border towns, the sheriff's office a lot of times live in nice little mansions, and I have no doubts that that's from the drug war money. But even independent of the corruption is that there's a large dependency on salaries. I mean, this is a huge industry where judges get nice salaries, federal judges, especially along the border, whose caseload is mostly drug cases and, of course, immigration cases. And then you've got the prosecutors and the clerks and the bureaucrats that are all dependent. They got mortgages, and they need this income to finance their lifestyles. So it's like, to me, the last remnants of people that are really arguing for this are the drug lords, because they know that they would go out of business with drug legalization, but also all the people that are benefiting in the law enforcement side from the drug war. They're making big money too off their nice little generous salaries, and also those that are on the take.
I was sorry. I thought I still had a copy of a book here right behind me, which I don't. It's called Baptists and Bootleggers, that came out a number of years ago. And the theme of this book about prohibition is that there were two people who did not want to see the end of prohibition. And that was the bootleggers, for the very reasons that you were just saying, but the Baptists, that is, those who felt that it was a sinful thing and government should stop it from occurring. And sometimes says, politics makes strange bedfellows. So here you had these religious ideologues who believe that the federal government should attempt to enforce laws against sinful behavior, and the criminals who benefited from it being illegal. And in fact, both of them worked very strongly in the political networks throughout the 1920s to try to prevent any elimination of the prohibition law. The one other thing that I sort of wanted to mention in this context is that we're always sort of dating ourselves, Jacob, when we talk about certain things, particularly about old television shows. But I remember when I was a mere lad, I remember watching as a kid on television the actor Robert Stack in Untouchables. And here he is as this famous FBI agent, and his job is to be tracking down and arresting and leading to the conviction of all of these criminal participants in the bootlegging industry, including Al Capone, which he eventually, in part of the storyline, because it did happen, he got arrested. But you think back on it, watching it as a kid, they're getting the bad guys. They're getting the bad guys. And Robert Stack, plays this agent, who's incorruptible. You can't bribe him. You can't blackmail him. You can't buy him off. I mean, a true representative of the law who's incorruptible. My golly, that makes me proud to be an American. But I think back upon it, but the show ran for several seasons. And what came out of this? The fact is, every episode, he's having to track down another group of gangsters dealing in alcohol. In other words, it's never brought to an end. When did it end? When Prohibition was ended in 1933. And you see, that's the analogy here. And as much as I recall watching every week the show on TV, because Robert Stack, who was the agent, the FBI agent he played, a famous one, I forget now. He was the bastion of legal righteousness, in the sense, the official that believed in the rule of law, enforcing the law, and you can't corrupt me because I'm going to get the bad guys. The point is, there was no end to bad guys because the law was indefensible and unenforceable at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what Elliot Ness did as soon as
Ness, yes, Elliot Ness.
I'm curious as to what happened to him after Prohibition was ended. He had nothing to do because that was his primary mission.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
He sat around twiddling his thumbs. Another program, Richard, I know we're almost out of time, or we are out of time, but it's worth mentioning because I recently saw an episode, I don't know how I caught it, of Dragnet, where it was a marijuana offense where they were fighting the drug war back there too. Jack Webb, is that what his name was?
Yes, Jack Webb, yes.
Jack Webb. And Friday.
And he played Sergeant Friday. Jack Webb played Sergeant Friday. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts, ma'am.
All right, Richard, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Again, thank you for tuning in. Thanks for your great support. Again, remember, this is the end of year time, our fundraising time. I hope you'll take the time to take a look at my end of year fundraising letter. It's there posted on our website at fff.org. And thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF. And Richard, I look forward to seeing you next week.
Until next time.